Welcome to Catholic Answers Live. Edgar Lujano filling in for Cy Kellett today. When you hear that music, you know what's going to happen. It's Weird Questions with Jimmy Akin today. Truly a pleasure to be here with you. It's been a bit of an interesting week here at Catholic Answers, where it's been a lot of pre-records and haven't taken a lot of questions. Well, today we're going to keep that trend going just for this week, and next week we'll be back to take all of your questions all week long. So, like I said, 2 full hours of Weird Questions with Jimmy Akin. Jimmy, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Although today is not a pre-record, we're here live.
That's true. It is not, in fact, a pre-record. So, that's one positive thing. So we can actually interact with people a little bit more on the chat. Although we don't actually do that too often for the show, which is all right. Yeah. Well, let me ask you, Jimmy, before we jump into actual questions, if somebody wants to submit a weird question to you, how would one go about doing so?
Well, it happens in different ways. One of the ways it happens is I occasionally post a community note on my YouTube page saying, hey, I've got a Weird Questions show coming up, or recording for Weird Questions coming up. Does anyone have any weird questions? And lots of people post responses to that. And that's how I get most of the questions, but it's not the only way. Sometimes people will email. They may email me, in which case I take their question and I put it in a log for use on the next or future Weird Question shows. They also sometimes email like radio@catholic.com, and you guys forward it to me, and then I put it in the log of questions for future Weird Question shows. And I try to prioritize the ones that are emailed. So if you email me, I try to get it in the very next show that we do.
Yeah, I know on occasion we also tend to get some weird questions whenever we're doing a live show for an Ask Me Anything. But I kind of like the idea of just having them all together, because then you can always go back and have some fun and just listen to a full hour or 2 hours of just weird questions. So,
well, we'll do that anyway. I don't mind having occasional weird questions on an Ask Me Anything. I think it spices things up a little more, rather than just having another iteration of, did Jesus have brothers, or where is purgatory in the Bible, or something like that.
It's like you've heard a few of those here and there, haven't you? Those questions.
I have heard some of them. I've thought about writing a series of books that answer the most common questions. The first volume in the series would be called something like "I Told You Already," and the next might be called something like "Don't Ask Me Again." And the titles would get progressively more irritable as the series goes on.
Fair enough. Well, we'll keep the audience informed if that book ever comes out. So we'll see. But in the meantime, let's jump right into the questions. So let's start off with Mari. Mari asks, can human beings possess one another? For example, would brainwashing techniques done by the CIA or other government agencies with use of LSD and other mind-altering drugs count as possession? My understanding is that the subject's personality is changed, and they become very influenceable. Is this a form of possession by humans?
Okay, so there are several things that Mari brings up here that are interrelated. One of them is use of LSD, and LSD is a substance that the CIA did extensive experiments with in the 1950s and 60s, precisely because they were looking, as part of the Cold War, for a way to control people's minds and behavior. So they got all of this LSD. In fact, the reason LSD became popular in the 60s was because the CIA popularized it without meaning to. They bought all this LSD, and then they started using it in their tests. And some people said, "Wow, that was a fun experience. I wonder if I could do that on my own." They didn't even know, many of them, that they were even being tested on. This was part of a program that was run by the CIA under the direction of a man named Sidney Gottlieb. And the program overall was called MK Ultra, and it engaged in extraordinarily unethical behavior. and there were numerous sub projects within MK Ultra looking for ways to mind control people. And just to give one example of not only is it unethical to test drugs on people without their informed consent, but I mean, that's unethical right there. But there was a particular gentleman in like 1953, I believe, who actually worked with MK Ultra named Frank Olson, and he was dosed at a retreat for CIA employees. He was a lot of the people who got tested were just members of the public, but he was at a retreat on the East Coast for CIA employees, and they had some Cointreau, which is kind of orange flavored liqueur, at this retreat, and they gave glasses of Cointreau to everybody. And what they didn't know was that the Cointreau had been dosed with LSD. And after Frank Olson had his, there's a dispute. According to some sources, he did get high from the LSD. According to others, he was one of the rare people that LSD doesn't affect at all. But either way, he had a crisis of conscience because he had been over in Europe and had seen the human experimentation that the CIA was doing on like prisoners from World War II. And he decided he was going to go to the press and spill the beans. And the CIA could not have that. So, on the claim, whether it's true or not, that he had gotten high as a result of the LSD, they portrayed him as having a psychotic break, and they took him up to New York City to be treated by a psychiatrist who was affiliated with the CIA. And they took him to a hotel, and his room was like up on the 13th floor of the hotel. And what do you know? But one night he goes out the window and kersplat on the pavement below. And according to some people with knowledge of the situation, he was actually defenestrated. He was thrown out the window to his death to keep him from spilling the beans on what the CIA was doing. Well, the MK Ultra, eventually Sidney Gottlieb retired, and the MK Ultra program either itself went away or changed names, and so it's not trackable. But in the early 1970s, Frank Olson's son Eric learned about this, that his father had been working with the CIA, and that's why it connected with how his father died. And they admitted, yeah, he did. He had this psychotic break after he was dosed without his knowledge with LSD, and his family was received at the White House by President Gerald Ford, who apologized to him, and Eric has never been satisfied. He continues to promote, how can we find out the truth about what happened with my father? And I actually did an episode of Mysterious World about Frank Olson. But he's just one example. Now, when Sidney Gottlieb retired, the director of the CIA or one of the high ups at the CIA had all of the MK Ultra files destroyed, so that what MK Ultra did could never come out. But a congressional committee in the 1970s known as the Church Committee started to look into the matter, and the CIA was like, hey, we don't have any files. They were unfortunately all destroyed to save shelf space or something. And it turned out that they had missed a batch of files that were primarily financial records of different sub-projects within MK Ultra, and so those came to light, and those got looked at. Now, reportedly, there are some additional MK Ultra files that still exist, and that just in the last couple of days, they were being reviewed for declassification per orders from President Trump. And reportedly, while President Trump is out of the country, in the last couple of days, representatives of the CIA swooped in and confiscated those files. And now there's a kerfuffle in Congress where Representative Luna is saying, you've got 24 hours to bring those files back. So there's some really interesting stuff here. But one of the things about LSD, which Mari mentions, is it doesn't seem to be that great for mind control. They experimented with it, but it doesn't seem to really do that. Whether the CIA has abilities, whether they were able to develop abilities to control someone's mind or their behavior is something that's disputed. According to the CIA, and what they said with the church committee was, well, we experimented in this area, but it didn't work, and that's why we killed MK Ultra. Others have said no, they did get some methods that would allow them to significantly modify a person's mental processing and behavior. They just kept it underground. And so there's a whole interesting area there that I'm exploring over time on Mysterious World. But let's suppose, per Mari's question, let's suppose that they did develop a way to control someone's mind. Would that be possession? Well, it wouldn't be possession in the way possession is conceived of in the Bible, where you have a spirit that seizes control of a living human. It would instead be a kind of external programming of one person by another living person. So it wouldn't be the same thing. It would be kind of similar, in that the affected person is under the influence or control of another living person or of someone else. But in that case, it would be another living person, not a spirit. So that would be the basic distinction. If you want to know, could a human being possess another human being in a more biblical sense? Well, that's an interesting question. One question would be, would it be would it be a living human being controlling another living human being, or would it be a departed human spirit controlling a living human being? If it's the first, it would be some kind of telepathic manipulation where one living person, like if I wanted to control you, we're both living people, I might use a mental message to try to get you to do what I want. And there is at least some claimed evidence for something like that happening. There was a researcher in the Soviet Union during the Cold War doing their version of mind control experiments. And what he did was he would try to hypnotize women, specifically like his secretary, and give them a post hypnotic suggestion to become receptive to telepathic suggestion. And according to the story that I've heard, he and his colleagues at one evening were together and they said, hey, let's try to send the secretary, whom he'd hypnotized, a suggestion that she needs to come over here right now. So they did. And then they thought, what if she gets lost, or I wonder if she's even doing it? And so they started walking over to the secretary's house. And it turns out she had this sudden compulsion to get up and go to where they were. And she was already walking over. And they met her. And she had no idea why she had this impulse. But she did. At least that's the report. So that would be a little closer to the biblical model of possession, since it involves mind to mind contact. It's not fully, though, like entering the person and seizing control of them. So what about like departed human spirits? Could they do this? Well, maybe. Now, I've got to introduce a terminological clarification. We today use the word demon to refer to a fallen angel. That's the way the term demon is used in theology and in church documents today. So demons by definition are non-human spirits. But it hadn't always been that way. The term demon has been used in Jewish and Christian contexts in other ways. For example, I recently did a mysterious world about the Erling exorcism in the early 20th century. It's publicized, among other things, in a booklet called Begone Satan. And one of the things that's clear from this booklet is even in the early 20th century here in America, Catholics, at least in this connected with this Erling exorcism, were using the term demon to include human spirits because the energumen, the possessed woman in this case, reported being possessed by Judas Iscariot and by the spirit of her own father and the spirit of her father's lover. So that would be three human spirits that she reported being possessed by. And they called them demons in the booklet. So that's at least a survival of an older usage. But if you go back to Second Temple literature, like the New Testament and the writings of Josephus, it's clear that demons were often considered to be not just fallen angels, but departed human spirits. And there is some evidence in the New Testament, even though it never says that's what's happening directly. If you look at the instances of possession in the New Testament, there is a plausible case, given that we know the term was used also for human spirits, that some of them are human, like in the possession of the Gadarene or Gerasene demoniacs that we read about in Matthew and Mark. Because Jesus goes to, he's in this territory, he meets the demoniacs, and where are they? Where have they been hanging out? Among the tombs, in graveyards. And so that could suggest that these were departed human spirits since they're hanging out in human graveyards. So there is at least some evidence that it might be possible for a departed human spirit to take control of a living human. The evidence in the New Testament is suggestive but not conclusive in that regard. There are other flat statements in authors like Josephus that say, yeah, sometimes it's a human spirit possessing a human. And there are even reports in exorcism situations down through church history where the spirit at least claimed to be a departed human spirit. But rule number one of dealing with demons is do not believe anything at all they say, because they are lying liars who are working for the father of lies. So I can honestly say there are reports of this, but whether they should be believed is a whole nother matter.
Mari, that's a whole lot of information. I hope that was helpful because that was very fascinating. Well, when we come back, we're going to take more questions on the special Weird Questions episode of Catholic Answers Live.
Answers Live anytime at Catholic.com.
Homeschool Connections, an online provider of courses for your Catholic homeschool and your homeschool co-op, is a sponsor of Catholic Answers Live. Homeschool Connections website is homeschoolconnections.com.
Are you a coffee drinker? If so, you can now enjoy a coffee roasted to perfection by the Carmelite monks of Wyoming. Delicious Mystic Monk coffee is roasted and prepared by monks in a hidden cloistered monastery and is available in over 25 varieties. All Mystic Monk coffees are works of perfection and labors of love. For more information on how to purchase Mystic Monk coffee, visit mysticmonkcoffee.com. That's mysticmonkcoffee.com.
The Adoration Sodality of the Poor Clares of Perpetual Adoration at the Shrine of the Most Blessed Sacrament in Hanceville, Alabama, is a prayer group for laity, priests, and religious brothers and sisters to spiritually join in the nuns' mission of adoring our Lord Jesus Christ in the Holy Eucharist. Members commit themselves to an hour of Eucharistic adoration on a monthly, weekly, or daily basis at a monstrance or tabernacle at the parish of their choice. Learn more about becoming a member at iadorethee.com.
Welcome back, Catholic Answers Live. Weird Questions with Jimmy Akin. So we're not taking your live calls, but hey, if you ever want to ask Jimmy a weird question, send an email, radio@catholic.com, and we'll forward it over to Jimmy and then you'll get your question. So let's continue. We go over to Jocelyn, and Jocelyn asks, "My 9-year-old son loves listening to your show. He is wondering if you could shed any light on what might happen if the souls in purgatory, when the end of the world comes. Do they get forcibly zapped through the rest to the rest? I'm sorry, I'm butchering this. Do they get forcibly zapped through the rest of their purification process?"
Well, howdy to Jocelyn and howdy to your 9-year-old son. I hope he's doing great. This is a question that I can answer with a substantial degree of confidence because it's it happens to be a subject that there is a Bible verse that directly bears on it. Um, the passage you and your son want to look at is 1 Corinthians 15, verses 51 and 52. And there, Paul is talking about the resurrection of the dead, and he says, "Behold, I tell you a mystery. We shall not all sleep," meaning we're not all going to die, "but we all shall all be changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. For the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised imperishable, and we shall be changed." And we're told elsewhere, like in 1 John, that we're going to be changed to be like Jesus because we're going to see him as he is. Okay, well, this says that at the end of the world, so the last trumpet, all of us, at least all Christians, we're all going to be changed. And he says that's going to happen in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye. The twinkling of an eye is essentially the time it takes you to recognize somebody. And so that's basically instantaneously. And so St. Paul indicates that this transformation that's going to happen to living people is going to be basically instantaneous. Well, if the transformation happens to living people instantaneously, then it would also happen to any departed spirits that are still being purified. It's like we're all going to be changed all at once at the second coming to be ready to greet Christ and be in his presence and things like that. So, yes, if someone is still being purified at the end of the world, when Jesus comes back, they, like the living humans, should be transformed instantly. It's not like the living humans get transformed instantly, and then if you were dead, you're going to have to wait for a longer period. So that would seem to be the basic answer here. The next question, though, is one I don't have as good of an answer for, and that's, well, if at the end of the world people get changed instantly, what about sooner than that? Because there is because if God can transform people and make them perfectly pure instantly, then, well, he could do that now. And in fact, there is it's not an apostolic tradition, but there is a tradition, lowercase tradition, or just an idea in the history of Catholic thought that time does not work the same way in the afterlife as it does in life. Time still exists in some form, but it may not work the way it does here. In the Middle Ages, theologians like St. Thomas Aquinas had a name for the way they thought time works in the afterlife. They called it aeviternity. It's different than time, and it's different than eternity. It's kind of midway between the two. It has some characteristics of time as we experience it, but it also has some characteristics of eternity. And aeviternity doesn't map neatly onto earthly time. So it could be that from an earthly perspective, um, uh, people's purification happens instantly. And in a few years ago, when Pope Benedict XVI was Pope, he wrote an encyclical called Spe Salvi, which means saved in hope. And he talked about this, and he said that the duration of purgatory cannot be calculated in earthly time. So from an earthly perspective, it could be instantaneous even today. The question would then be, well, what about praying for people, who are in purgatory? Because I've got to pray for them in time. And if their purification is instant, how does my prayer help them? Well, one of the things that Pope Benedict said was that it doesn't matter because God, he is totally outside of time. And so he can help someone no matter when they are. So even if their purification is instantaneous, God can still help them. And it doesn't matter that they're already out of purgatory from an earthly perspective because God could help them when they were in purgatory. Even if it's instant and in our past, God could help them when they were in it because he's outside of time. He sees all times simultaneously. And so just like if you're praying for someone in the future, if you're praying for someone in the past, God can still help that person. And so as Pope Benedict said, it is never too late to pray for someone in purgatory.
Beautiful. Jocelyn, thank you for your question, and thank your 9-year-old son for that question as well. When we come back, more questions with Jimmy Akin on Catholic Answers Live.
Who was Jesus? It's the most important question in the world. Was he a great teacher? A religious myth? The Messiah and Lord? In Evidence for Christ, apologist Jimmy Akin builds a powerful step-by-step case from history, scripture, and reason, showing that Jesus is the fulfillment of prophecy and the risen Lord. Get your copy of Jimmy Akin's Evidence for Christ today at shop.catholic.com or at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Have you ever wondered about the mysterious, even obscure aspects of the Catholic faith? Dive into the Jimmy Akin podcast, where Jimmy brings together information from many fields as he pushes the boundaries of apologetics. Tune in today to the Jimmy Akin podcast, Mysteries of the Faith, a highly entertaining, informative, and at times humorous show that will help you grow in your faith. Visit JimmyAkinPodcast.com today to subscribe.
Feeling stuck? Feeling like you're not sure what's next? Well, you can be sure of this. God is not finished with you yet. In his new book, Not Finished Yet, Dr. Marcus Peter shares a powerful message of hope, healing, and transformation in Jesus Christ. Read it to discover how to overcome struggles, embrace grace, and step into the life God is calling you to. Get Not Finished Yet today at shop.catholic.com or at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
The world has a lot of questions about Catholicism. It's a big faith, and it deserves a big book of answers. Well, now it has two. Get the Big Book of Catholic Answers, Volume 2, and have 300 clear, reliable Catholic answers right at your fingertips whenever something comes up at work, with friends, or around the dinner table. Order your copy of the Big Book of Catholic Answers, Volume 2 at shop.catholic.com or pick one up at your favorite Catholic bookstore.
Welcome back. Weird Questions with Jimmy Akin. Before we get back to some more questions, because it is Friday, and every Friday a new episode of Mysterious World drops. Jimmy, what came out today?
Today we had an episode on a phenomenon that has been reported throughout human history, but it began to be studied about 140 years ago, and scientifically studied, and they needed a name for it, and the name they came up with was crisis apparitions. Now, an apparition is when something appears. In fact, that's where the word apparition comes from. Something that appears is an apparition. Well, what's a crisis? Well, that's fairly straightforward. A crisis is an emergency, maybe even an emergency where you die. And what they discovered back in the 1880s over in England with the Society for Psychical Research, what they discovered is that a lot of the times when people reported the apparition of a ghost, the person was actually still alive. These looked like apparitions not of deceased people, but of living people, and they frequently coincided plus or minus 12 hours with a crisis in which the person frequently died. And so the definition of a crisis apparition is when an apparition of a person appears within 12 hours of a crisis, either up to 12 hours before the crisis or up to 12 hours after. Frequently it is, but not always, it is a crisis that involves their death. And so there are loads of reports of people saying, my father died, and at the moment he died, he appeared to me. Or my son was in this terrible accident and got injured, and at that moment he appeared to me. And actually, you know how medical science today uses, well, I'll tell the story from the other end. There was a gentleman who at the time was doing this was, in the late 1800s, and he was in Prussia, which is part of Germany today. And there was a compulsory requirement. You had to do a certain amount of military service. So he was doing his military service, and he was in the artillery, which is the guys who shoot cannons. And the cannons at the time were drawn by horses. Well, there was this runaway horse incident, and this guy was seriously injured by some horses that were dragging a cannon. And then that later that day, he gets a telegram from his father, and his father said, "Your sister said that she had this sudden awareness of you being hurt. Are you okay? She insisted that we stop what we're doing and pray for you, and that I send you this to find out if you're okay." And it turns out that his sister had this awareness of his accident at the exact moment it happened. And he became so interested in this that he had been planning on being like an astronomer. But he was a young man at the time because he was still doing his compulsory military service. He decided to go into medicine. He became a psychiatrist, and he became specifically, and you have to have a medical degree for that. And he decided that he wanted to, he said, my sister obviously had this telepathic impression of me. I want to find out how that works. I want to find out a way to measure the thoughts that were used to connect me and my sister in this moment. And so he developed the electroencephalogram that we still use to measure people's brain waves. Now, telepathy would be a little more complex than this, but still, this is a foundational thing that is still used in modern medicine. We still use EEGs to measure people's brain waves, and the reason we have that device is because of a crisis apparition.
Wow.
So today's mystery is all about crisis apparitions.
All right, well, there you have it. Check it out on Jimmy Akin YouTube channel or at mysterious.fm to check that out after the show. So check that out. All right, let's go over to the next question. Is by Rez Carey 8809. They ask, if you have good reason to believe a ghost in purgatory is trying to get your attention, is it morally okay to ask them to reveal their identity? Context. A few years ago, I was home alone with my newborn daughter on All Souls Day, and I heard repeated loud rattling sounds coming from the kitchen. The baby began screaming. I calmly walked out and said, "Whoever is bothering my baby, go away." The rattling stopped, and I have never heard it since. I have had mass said for the soul, and also for one person I suspect it might have been, but I'm not sure. Is it forbidden to ask for such knowledge, or should I be content to wait?
Okay, so let's take this a piece at a time. The first thing Rez Carey says is, if you have good reason to believe a ghost in purgatory is trying to get your attention, is it morally okay to ask them to reveal their identity? Well, if Rez and I were talking face to face, my first question would be, well, why wouldn't it be? Why wouldn't, if a person walks up to me and is trying to get my attention, a living person, I'm going to say, well, who are you? And there's nothing wrong with me asking, who are you, of a living person? So why would there be any problem with me asking, who are you, of a deceased person? Now, some people have heard this idea, and this ain't church teaching. But some people have this idea that, oh, you're not allowed to talk to spirits. Well, nonsense, you're not allowed to talk to spirits. The New Testament expects Christians to encounter spirits and talk to them. If you read, for example, 1 John 4, John says, okay, don't believe every spirit. Well, number one, that means you're talking with them if they're telling you stuff, presumably. But he says don't. But he makes it clear, even clearer, because he says don't believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they're of God. And then he goes on to discuss how you can do that. Well, you can't test a spirit if you don't talk to it. And so the New Testament expects Christians to be in contact with spirits and to talk to them and to test them and find out if they are if they're from God or if they're from some other source. Well, I would say, therefore, yeah, there's no problem. Just like you can ask a living person, who are you? You can ask a deceased spirit, who are you? Now, that doesn't mean you should automatically believe them, because, as we discussed before the break, demons are lying liars who lie and are working for the father of lies. And as St. Paul says, Satan can disguise himself as an angel of light. So they will lie about who they are. So you don't want to just believe what they tell you. I mean, not if you have evidence to the contrary, but you would want to test them. And that's what St. John is saying in 1 John 4. So yeah, absolutely. You can ask them. And there's some interesting history that a lot of people are not aware of. I find a lot of people who make pronouncements in these areas are really not that deeply educated in the broader Catholic tradition on these points. People who make absolute declarations like you're never supposed to talk to spirits. Well, that's not what St. Thomas Aquinas would say. In fact, he envisioned, and this is based on a question that he answered in his quadlibital questions, which were the ancient version of a Catholic Answers Live AMA, where you could ask anything, the medieval equivalent, where you could ask anything you wanted, and Aquinas, if he's doing the AMA, he'd give you an answer. Well, one of the questions that was put to him was, can you ask a dying person to reveal their fate after death? Did you make it to heaven, or are you in purgatory, or did you go to hell? And he said, yeah, you can. Not in terms of like you're testing God to see if there's really an afterlife. You shouldn't do that. But he said it's natural to seek knowledge, and there's nothing wrong with having this knowledge. So yeah, you could do that. You could talk to a dying person and say, if you're able, after you've passed on, I'd love it if you could come back and let me know, did you make it, or do you need prayers, or things like that. And so Aquinas envisioned that person then dying and having communication with you. In fact, he had communication with his own sister after she died. She appeared to him on more than one occasion. The first time she appeared, she said, hey, bro, because he was her bro. She said, hey, bro, I'm being purified right now, and I could really use some prayers and masses. So he arranged for that to happen. And we have like his younger contemporary, Bishop Bernard of Guy, who was his biographer, that recorded this. So this is not something that was recorded centuries later. This is like recorded shortly after he died, that his sister had appeared to him, and she had asked for prayers and masses. He arranged for those to happen. And then his sister comes back and says, dude, it worked. Thank you so much. And he said, but then he asks questions. He doesn't ignore her or refuse to talk to her. Instead, he asks questions, and he says, what about my two brothers who have died, Reginald and Landulf? How are they doing? And his sister says, well, Reginald is already in heaven, but Landulf is still being purified. And I don't know whether I don't recall, did he himself ask about this or not, but what she then told him is, you're going to be joining us soon, but you're going to get a greater reward than we are because of your labors for the church. But notice he's talking with his sister. So yeah, you could ask if you suspect a soul in purgatory is trying to get your attention, you can pay attention. You can ask them who they are. You could test them. You don't necessarily have to. You could just say, if you get a message like, yeah, mine, I just need prayers, even if you don't know who they are. I mean, if they tell you, great. If they don't, but if they're trying to get prayers or masses, well, then pray for them. Have mass said for them. Totally fine, good thing to do. And there are many other examples. Now, I just named one from Thomas Aquinas, but there are many examples throughout Christian history where Christians do not have any problem talking to purgatorial spirits or spirits that are of unknown origin. To give an unknown origin one, around the year 414, Saint Martin of Tours was a bishop in France, and there was this incident is recorded in Pope Gregory the Great's dialogues, but he records that Saint Martin of Tours was concerned because there was this local shrine that was supposed to be a shrine to a martyr, but it wasn't clear that it was really a shrine to a martyr. And Martin of Tours was not, he wanted validation. He didn't want a shrine to a martyr if it's not a martyr. You know, he wanted to make sure that people are only venerating a martyr if it's a real martyr. So he got some of his priests and they went to the site, and they prayed that this whatever spirit it was would appear to them, you know, be an apparition, and the spirit appears. And Martin says, well, like, who are you? And he says, actually, I'm not a martyr. I was a criminal. And I died and was buried here, and people thought I was a martyr because there was a lot of confusion. It was shortly after the age of martyrs, and they built this shrine even though I'm not a martyr. And so Martin said, thank you very much, and they moved the shrine to an actual sacred place. And we'll notice that he didn't know who this spirit was, and he had no problem talking with him. And so talking to unknown spirits and checking them out and talking to spirits in purgatory, this is a totally normal thing in Catholic history.
Well, there you have it, Rez Carey. Thank you for your question. Let's go over to our final break for the hour. When we come back, we'll take more weird questions with Jimmy Akin.
This is Archbishop Paul Coakley, the Archdiocese of Oklahoma City, and you're listening to Catholic Answers Live.
Who was the first Catholic in your family? Were they evangelized by a friend, a coworker, a stranger? Did you ever think that you could be that person that God uses to save a soul, and that soul could save their family, their grandchildren, and generations to come? At St. Paul Street Evangelization, a Catholic nonprofit, we train, equip, and mobilize Catholic disciples to do the urgent work of evangelization. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization, streetevangelization.com.
One of the reasons we should go to Mass is because it is the food of the saints that we receive. And for the saints, they understood rightly that the time after Holy Communion, that those moments are the most precious moments of our lives.
The Holy Sacrifice of the Mass, live from the EWTN Chapel, every morning, 8 Eastern, on EWTN Radio and Television.
Welcome back, Catholic Answers Live. Weird questions, and we'll jump right back into it because the hour's flying by too quickly. So I want to try to get more questions here. Severe Famine asks, are there fallen guardian angels? If so,
do
we get a replacement if our intended guardian angel fell?
Well, this is an interesting question in that there is not a single answer that the church mandates on it. So, what I'll do is I'll tell you the common view, then I'll tell you what the alternatives to the common view are, and then I'll tell you what conclusion I think we can draw. The common view is that any angels who fell did so before the creation of men. That is, God made the angels first, and that's pretty well solid in Catholic thought. It's not, but the idea of when they fell is not as well defined. What the Catechism says is they fell through their own fault, but it didn't tell us when or whether it was all at once. Now, a common opinion that in part was supported by St. Thomas Aquinas is that they had to make a choice in the first moment of their existence, and that permanently set their course. If they chose in the first moment of their existence to support God or oppose God, that then becomes fixed. But the key thing for this question is, did it happen if they were created before man? Did it happen in the first moment of their existence? Because if it did, well, then any angels who fell before there were any humans to guard. So your guardian angel would be, assuming you have only one, and that it's the same all the time. And I don't think either of those are guaranteed because Scripture doesn't say either of those. You might have more than one guardian angel, or you might have different guardians at different times. But if any angel that fell would have fallen before you were around, and therefore would never have been assigned to you as a guardian. So if the common view is correct, your guardian angel is unfallen and will permanently be unfallen. So that's the common view. Are there any alternatives? Well, there are, because the church has not mandated that they all fell at the same time in the first moment of their existence. That's a theological proposal, but it's not church teaching. Do we see any evidence for them falling in stages? Well, in fact, we do. The devil first shows up in the form of the snake in Genesis 3. So he's already fallen. We don't know when that happened. There's some interesting extra biblical literature like the life of Adam and Eve that discusses that, but it's not part of the Bible. But we know the devil has fallen by Genesis 3. But then we get up to Genesis 6, and it refers to the sons of God marrying the daughters of men and giving birth to the Nephilim. Okay, so the phrase sons of God in the Old Testament normally refers to high-ranking angels. And Nephilim is the Aramaic word for giants. So, and I've got several episodes, both of Mysterious World and the Jimmy Akin podcast, that deal with the Nephilim. So you can look those up for more information. But what it looks like is happening in Genesis 6, and this is confirmed in other Jewish literature, like the Book of Enoch, which is actually quoted in the New Testament, is that there were at least 200 angels that fell in Genesis 6. They abandoned their heavenly dwelling. That's something the Book of Jude refers to, and were tempted by strange flesh, meaning human flesh in this case. So that would be 2 falls of angelic spirits, and St. Paul may hold out the possibility of more, because in 1 Corinthians, he says something very strange, and I won't go through it in super detail because we're coming up on the end of the episode of this hour. But he says that women ought to wear head coverings in church because of the angels, and it's a very unusual passage. But the best explanation for it is that, and this, I'm going to omit some details here, but the best explanation that scholars have been able to come up with is it looks like in the first century, based on the medical science of the day, they viewed women's hair as a sexual characteristic, the long hair that would actually help them have babies, not just by attracting a man, but the hair itself would help them have babies. So it was a sexual characteristic, and to be flaunting your sexual characteristic in church, bad idea. You want to keep that covered for modesty's sake. And so when Paul says you want to do this, you want to keep it covered because of the angels, well, we know that our worship blends into the heavenly worship. So, I mean, we invoke the angels at Mass, and so if they're looking down on our earthly worship and worshiping God with us, and we know they've fallen before because of human women, you don't necessarily want them looking down and seeing women flaunting their sexual characteristics. So the logic that St. Paul seems to be using is we don't want to tempt any of the angels, and that would suggest that that they could still fall. Well, if this staged fall view is correct, then, and I'm not saying it is, but if it's correct, then hypothetically your guardian angel could fall unless God only picked guardians from those angels who were already confirmed in goodness. If he allowed angels that were still undergoing their probationary period to be guardians, then hypothetically your guardian could fall. But that leads us to the conclusion that I think can be reasonably drawn, which is, even if that happened, God's not going to let us go unguarded. Even if it were possible for your guardian angel to fall, if the common view is incorrect, and even if your angel did fall, God's not going to leave you unguarded. He gives people guardian angels for a reason. And it's just like, if you've got a jeweler's store and you've hired guards to guard it and one of them turns into a criminal, well, you fire him and hire a new guard. And God, we're as precious to God as diamonds in a jewelry store. So, I mean, he died for us. He shed his blood for us. So he's not going to let us go unguarded. So you don't have to worry about, is your guardian angel going to fall? Even if he could, even if he did, you're still going to be protected. God will make sure you have a guardian who's going to keep you safe.
There you have it, severe famine. Hopefully that was helpful. Fascinating.
And good luck with that severe famine problem too.
Well, hopefully all this knowledge will help cure some of that hunger he has, at least for the knowledge sake, not the physical sake, I guess. All right. Well, Jimmy, since we're coming close to the end, I wanted to ask you, I already asked you about A Mysterious World, but every Monday you have the Jimmy Akin podcast. So what did we just have this past Monday?
So the most recent, since yesterday was Ascension Thursday, I decided to prepare for that by releasing an episode on Monday about Jesus's ascension. What happened there? Did he fly into outer space? Would he be traveling at the speed of light? He'd still be in the Milky Way galaxy. And what's really going on in this passage? So it's much more interesting than some of the mocking you sometimes hear from skeptics, and the ascension. And why would he do this? There's actually some very good reasons why he didn't just disappear in a burst of light. The ascension teaches us lessons. Coming up this Monday, we're going to be heading towards Pentecost. So this Monday, I'm going to have an episode on Pentecost and what the actual tongues were, because this is a big dispute in some circles. But if we take a careful look at the evidence in the book of Acts and in 1 Corinthians, we can tell what kind of tongues Luke is talking about there. And so that's coming up this Monday. So 2 episodes tied to our current liturgical season with information about the Ascension and Pentecost.
All right. And if you can find that on any place you listen to your podcast, and also on the Jimmy Akin YouTube channel, which is kind of great because it's a one-stop shop shop for all of your podcasts of Mysterious World and the Jimmy Akin podcast. So check that out, Jimmy Akin at YouTube. Just type that into the search bar. Well, we still have a whole other hour of weird questions. So hang in there, go take a break, go grab some water, go grab some coffee, and come and hang out with us in just a few minutes. We'll be right back with Catholic Answers Live. Welcome back, Catholic Answers Live. We are doing a Weird Questions today with Jimmy Akin. When you hear that music, you know you're always in for a great time with some fun questions. I am Edgar Lujano, the producer for the show, and filling in for Cy Kellett today. It's always a pleasure to be with you on this side of the glass. And Jimmy, we got plenty of questions, so shall we jump back in?
Sure, absolutely.
All right, well, let's go over to Rafael Figueredo, 4858. He asks, what do you say to critics of your content on NDEs who say that it understates the skeptical research in the academic NDE literature?
Well, I would say a couple of things. First one, I actually don't have that much content on NDEs. I've done a couple of episodes of Mysterious World on it. I plan to do much more, but in the episodes I've done, especially the first one that was a general overview, I was actually very cautious about NDEs. Now, the other thing I would say is I've read a lot of the academic literature on NDEs, and I think Raphael may be under a misimpression about what that academic literature contains, because it seems that he may be under the impression that it's much more skeptical of NDEs than it actually is. There are some skeptics who have written about NDEs, like Susan Blackmore, for example, would be an example of that. She's a researcher over in the UK, and there are others too. But the skeptics actually are a pretty small group. So I think Raphael may simply not be aware of the breadth of research on near-death experiences, and it's actually much more positive than what he may be aware of. Having said that, skeptical proposals may indeed explain some NDEs or some aspects of NDE that are commonly reported in NDEs, but they don't explain it all. There is no comprehensive skeptical theory or aggregation of theories that explains all of the elements we find commonly reported in near-death experiences. So that's the first thing, is we just don't have explanatory power in the theories that skeptics have proposed. Maybe a given skeptical theory will explain some aspect that's commonly reported in NDEs or particular NDEs, but we don't have a comprehensive skeptical explanation. So lack of explanatory power is one thing. The second thing I would say is it's all speculation. You know, you will find papers like by Susan Blackmore proposing, well, here, maybe this brain mechanism could explain this aspect of NDEs. Like, for example, one of the commonly reported aspects of NDEs is a sense of motion through darkness towards a light. This is often described as kind of like going down a tunnel, although not everybody uses that metaphor. There was one gentleman who, I forget if he was a truck driver or an auto mechanic, but after he had his NDE, he said it was like going through a tailpipe. But Susan Blackmore has proposed, well, maybe that experience has to do with the shutting down of the visual center at the back of your brain. Maybe your visual center shuts off in such a way that you have this experience that's kind of tunnel-like with a light at the end of it. Okay, fine as a proposal. But that's all it is a proposal. It is speculation. There are no empirical studies backing this up. And there's very good reason for that, why there are no empirical studies backing up any of these skeptical proposals. Would you care to take a guess at why there might be no empirical studies backing up any of these proposals, Edgar?
Maybe because the people that have gone through it have died?
No, they're still alive. At least some of them are.
Okay, I'm not sure.
You can't ethically kill people. You can't, this is not the movie Flatliners. You can't cause people to die for purposes of studying what brain phenomena are connected with what near death experience aspects. And if you can't kill someone, you can then, try to get them back. You can't run experiments on these phenomena. It is not ethical. So, at least not normally. There is an exception. There are some surgeries where where you do need to turn off a person's heart. And there's actually a famous incident of that where so you turn off their heart, you like cool their body down and stuff like that, but you do the surgery on them that you need to repair them, and then you start their heart again. And there's actually a famous there is a famous NDE account connected with that. There was an American country music star. I forget her name, but she urgently needed a surgery that required her heart to be shut off. And I believe they were working on her brain, and that's why they needed the heart shut off, so they wouldn't have blood flow through the brain as they were working on her. And they, among other things, they needed to monitor her brain waves, what was going on in her brain as part of this study. And they also they played, I believe it was clicking noises in her ears to block as a way of stimulating what's her brain doing. Is it picking up on these clicks? But as a result of that, I mean, when her heart was offline and there's no blood flow, they're not going to pick up, she's not going to be conscious at all. And she's not going to be able to hear anything because they have these clicks that are really loud to try to get her brain to react in some way. And even though she's completely unconscious and her heart is shut off and she couldn't hear anything anyway, when she came back, she was able to do stuff like describe exactly what the surgeons were talking about when she was clinically dead. And that is a kind of information that is known as veridical information. Veridical information is information that could not simply be guessed, so it goes beyond random chance. The person had no natural way of knowing this information, and it turns out to be true. So that's what veridical information is. It's information beyond random chance, no normal way of knowing it, and it turns out to be true. And there are a bunch of veridical aspects of near-death experiences, like what happened with this particular heart-stopping incident I mentioned. But there are lots of others too. I've often told the story of Maria's shoe. Maria was a Hispanic woman who in the 1970s was taken to a hospital in the American Northwest with cardiac arrest. She had an out-of-body experience. She looked down at her body and saw the doctors working on her. Then she moved her consciousness elsewhere in the hospital. She saw a blue tennis shoe on the ledge outside of a window on an upper floor of the hospital. And when they got her heart started again, she talked about this, and one of the workers at the hospital who could speak enough Spanish to communicate with her, this being the 1970s, they didn't have people who were fluent around, went and found the shoe. It was really there. And this woman had come into the hospital, at night at ground level with this heart problem. There are many others too. One of my favorite examples is a guy has a near-death experience. He also has, the technical term is an autoscopic experience where you see yourself. And so he had an out-of-body experience. He's looking down at himself, watching the surgeons, and he sees this one surgeon who's Japanese flapping his arms like a chicken. And and they get his heart started again. And he asks the doctor, "What were you doing with your arms?" And the doctor, because it looked like you were flapping them like a chicken, and the doctor actually got kind of offended. But it came out that the doctor the way I don't know that he was trained this way in Japan, but he had adopted the habit when he's in the operating theater because he didn't want to get his hand, even though they really try to keep everything in there sterile. He was afraid of getting germs on his hands while he was operating. And so what he would do is when he needed something, instead of pointing to it with his hands, he would point with his elbows. And that's what the flapping his arms was. There are numerous other examples. People have like read the serial numbers on the equipment they're using as they're looking down from the top of the room, and there's like a big light or something. They've read the serial number on the top of the light. They've heard conversations their relatives or doctors were having out in the hallway. And one guy came back and said to the doctor, I noticed you ate my lunch, because he had been flat. He kept having cardiac arrest in his room. They couldn't move him to an operating theater. They were trying to get his heart stabilized in good rhythm, but he kept flatlining. And so his doctor, who was brand new, I forget if he was an intern or just out of his internship, but this is like the first time he had to care for someone in this situation. The guy kept flatlining, so he had to stay in the room to give him shocks to re-jolt his heart. And he felt like, they're leaving me here all alone and I'm brand new. They should be here with me. And it's been several hours I've been staying with this guy, and I'm getting hungry, and they haven't brought me any food, but here's his lunch. And the guy said, while I was out, you thought, why are they leaving me here alone? And then you ate my lunch. So there are a huge number of veridical experiences that are reported in NDEs. There's a whole book about them, in fact, by a group of researchers led by Titus Rivas, who's a European researcher. The book is called The Self Does Not Die, but it's got over 100 veridical NDEs that have confirmation from medical personnel. Also, there are other interesting veridical aspects of NDEs. Like, one of them is psychopomps. So a psychopomp is a soul guide. And sometimes the psychopomps that they're like there to bring you into the afterlife. And they tend to be one of two kinds. Either they're identified as angels or as deceased relatives. So sometimes it's an angel that shows up to bring you into the afterlife. Sometimes it's a relative. But what they've noticed is when it's like a family member or someone you know, that person's always dead. They're genuinely dead. Now, if this were all a hallucination, there ought to be living people showing up as psychopomps. Like, if you're just dreaming this, well, your dreams aren't all about dead people you've known. They include living people, but we don't see living people among the psychopomps that are reported in these experiences. And then there are what are known as shared death experiences, where a living person who's present shares in the NDE. So they may see the person's soul get out of their body. They may experience the light and the joy and the music. They may see the psychopomps. It's also reported there are distortions of space when the death process is happening. But here we have someone who is not dead and not dying, standing right there, mentally perceiving what the dying person is going through. And if the dying person doesn't die, they can then confirm that. So that's an additional form of veridical experience. And so there are multiple different aspects of near-death experiences that a standard skeptical account has no way of accounting for. Now, does that prove that near-death experiences are genuinely cases of human survival beyond bodily death? Well, properly speaking, and here I'm showing myself being scientific, properly speaking, the answer is no. because there is another explanation besides survival that could account for this, and that is psychic functioning. Maybe, for example, Maria, who had the shoe, maybe she didn't really survive her death when her heart was stopped. Maybe she was just a clairvoyant, and she clairvoyantly perceived the shoe and then misremembered it as a perception she had while her heart was stopped. This is an explanation that's sometimes called living agent psi. The idea is it's really psychic functioning being done by a living person. But there are problems with the living agent psi explanation, and I think the balance of evidence very strongly indicates that near-death experiences are instances of survival. I don't have time to go into all the reasons why, but I think that's what the evidence strongly indicates. But in either event, standard skeptical accounts that say, oh, this is all natural, there's nothing paranormal going on here, that's clearly wrong, because the skeptical accounts have no way of accounting for the veridical information these experiences contain. Psychic functioning might, but that's not a normal natural explanation. So you either got to say there's genuine survival of bodily death or at least psychic functioning happening, neither one of which is a skeptic is going to be happy about.
Raphael, thanks for that question. Time for our first break. When we come back, more weird questions with Jimmy Akin.
Miss a show? Make sure to catch up by downloading the podcast, available online at Catholic.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Magnificat. Published monthly, Magnificat features texts of daily Mass, prayers, articles, meditations, art commentaries, and more, in step with the liturgical rhythm of the Church, on the web at Magnificat.com.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
All this month, we continue to honor the Blessed Virgin Mary with special devotions, prayers, and acts of veneration. And of course, Catholic Radio's premier shows, featuring Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers, Ave Maria in the afternoon, Women of Grace with Johnnette Williams, EWTN News in Depth, and more. EWTN Radio, your source of truth that allows Catholics to grow in their faith and recognize the true mission of the Catholic Church.
Welcome back, Catholic Answers Live. Thanks for joining us, and we're doing weird questions, which is always fun to go through. So we jump back in. F-Man
today we've been having a lot of afterlife questions.
That's a good point.
We'll see if that, yeah.
Afterlife questions, and then I think that first one of the possessions question with MK Ultra. I think that one blew my mind in the beginning of this episode. Didn't realize all it was still happening.
My work here is almost done.
Almost. Maybe in about 40 minutes, your work here is almost done. Yeah. All right. Fman6956 asks, what do you think of the way purification seems to occur in Father Nathan Castle's afterlife accounts? It would seem that rather than experiencing a painful and fiery purification, as often depicted in pious stories and prayers about purgatory over the centuries, the souls essentially just learn new things and gradually correct their misunderstandings and errors, including needing to come to grips with their past sins and their effects on others. The idea that angels, saints, and deceased relatives all get involved at different points along the journey of purification of souls and to help them move to a new level really appeals to me.
Okay, so first I should mention who Father Nathan Castle is for those who may not be familiar. He's a Dominican priest in the western province of the United States, and he reports that he regularly, I think at least weekly, has a dream in which he's contacted by a person who died a violent death. And the person who died the violent death, he sees how that person died, and then he knows he needs to contact this person. And so he'll go into prayer, and they'll pray, for protection. They pray to St. Michael, they pray to the Blessed Virgin and so forth, but they pray that they may have contact with the spirit. And so this is not him reaching out to make contacts with spirits. He's just responding. So this is a form of responsive communication. It's like if an apparition showed up to you and said, "Hey, I'm a soul in purgatory. I need prayer." Well, you could respond to him like we talked about earlier. And he's doing that. He's doing responsive communication. He's not on his own initiative saying, "Oh, I want to talk to dead folks." He's waiting until he has an apparition in a dream, and then he tries to help that person, just like St. Thomas Aquinas did with his sister. Now, the way this works is he tries to, speak with the spirit and essentially give them a kind of counseling to help them move on in the afterlife, because they may have various resentments and ties to things on earth that they need to let go of in order to make progress spiritually. Like they may be still just bitterly resenting how they died, for example, since they died violently. Well, okay, that's one of the things that one would need to let go of to make spiritual progress. And that's similar to what the Catechism says the purpose of purgatory is, that it's to purify us of our attachments to things from this life that are disordered, things like resentments and so forth. Now, the way Father Castle, and by the way, I have a couple of episodes of Mysterious World where in one of them I interview Father Castle, and in another I give a theological analysis of his work, so people can check those out for more information. But what F-Man is asking about is, this sounds different than a lot of the common language that's been used, at least here in the West, for purgatory, where it's envisioned as having this fiery purification. Well, okay, it does sound different. There are a few things I would note. The first thing I would say is I suspect all of these perceptions are heavily culturally conditioned, no matter who is claiming to have experienced contact with the soul from purgatory. I think because we are not designed in this life to understand the afterlife, we have to understand it in terms of the images that we have in our imagination and things like that. This is something Pope Benedict talked about in Spe Salvi, that scripture and tradition present us with images, but they shouldn't be taken literally, because we're not able to imagine what the realities are going to be like. One of the images that's become common in the West in connection with afterlife purification is fire, because St. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 3 that our works will be tested by fire on Judgment Day. And that image has not been used in the East the way it is in the West. So that of itself would suggest this is a culturally conditioned image. Now, what it represents is also an interesting question. There were people in the Middle Ages who would argue, oh, it's literal physical fire. Okay, but if you don't have a body in the afterlife, how does physical fire affect you when you don't have a physical form? And there was a split on this question. Some people said, oh, well, God can miraculously make it have physical fire have an influence on your immaterial soul. Other people said, nah, I think the fire is a symbol of something else. Recently, Pope Benedict favored that idea. He didn't mandate it, but he favored that idea that the image of fire should be understood as a transforming encounter with Christ and his love. It's like his love burns away all of our impurities and enables us to be ready for the glory of heaven. Okay, so there have been people who have understood purgatory in terms of fire, whereas Father Castle seems to understand it primarily in terms of like counseling or education or something like that. But that also has has and it's also much more imaginative than just people burning in fire until they're ready to go to heaven. And that also has a precedent in Catholic history. There are multiple apparitions of purgatorial souls that aren't just people burning in fire, that something much more interesting is going on where they're not clearly suffering. And that's a nice cliffhanger. So I'll tell you the rest of that story on the other side of the break.
All right, perfect place to put a pause, a comma. A comma would be the best way of putting it. So we'll put a comma on that one. When we come back, we'll finish off this question on Catholic Answers Live.
Who was Jesus? It's the most important question in the world. Was he a great teacher, a religious myth, the Messiah and Lord? In Evidence for Christ, apologist Jimmy Akin builds a powerful, step-by-step case from history, scripture, and reason showing that Jesus is the fulfillment of prophecy and the risen Lord. Get your copy of Jimmy Akin's Evidence for Christ today at shop.catholic.com or at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
The world has a lot of questions about Catholicism. It's a big faith, and it deserves a big book of answers. Well, now it has two. Get the Big Book of Catholic Answers, Volume 2, and have 300 clear, reliable Catholic answers right at your fingertips, whenever something comes up at work, with friends, or around the dinner table. Order your copy of the Big Book of Catholic Answers, Volume 2 at shop.catholic.com, or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Have you ever wondered about the mysterious, even obscure aspects of the Catholic faith? Dive into the Jimmy Akin podcast, where Jimmy brings together information from many fields as he pushes the boundaries of apologetics. Tune in today to the Jimmy Akin podcast, Mysteries of the Faith, a highly entertaining, informative, and at times humorous show that will help you grow in your faith. Visit JimmyAkinPodcast.com today to subscribe.
Why do we baptize? Does it really do anything? In Baptism Now Saves You, Dr. Carlo Broussard explains the unbreakable relationship between baptism and salvation, making sense of the Church's teachings in a way that is easy to understand and ready to share. St. Peter said, "Repent and be baptized, every one of you." Discover what that means today. Order your copy of Baptism Now Saves You at shop.catholic.com or ask for it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Catholic Answers Live, Weird Questions with Jimmy Akin. Jimmy, you were in the middle of answering a question about the afterlife, predictions?
Purgatory.
Purgatory of Father Nathan Castle. So you were in the middle of that.
Yeah, so I was contrasting, or the F-man who asked the question noted that that many people historically in the West have understood purgatory as involving fire as the thing that purifies you. But Father Castle reports, at least with the souls he encounters, that he reports encountering, that it's different. It's more like educational or counseling, and it's something much more interesting and different than just, well, I'm being purged by this flame. And there are echoes of that more diverse and approach to things in Christian history. There are lots of accounts of purgatorial souls that are being purified, but not in a way that involves any kind of flame. For example, in his dialogues, St. Gregory the Great records a bunch of paranormal experiences. In fact, I recently went through the dialogues. It's 4 books long, but I went through all 4 books and classified each paranormal experience that Gregory records in modern terms, like, this would be a telepathic experience, this would be a clairvoyant experience, this would be, an apparition, and so forth. And there's like, I think going on 300 experiences in the dialogues, and it makes a really fascinating little database. I'm going to be doing an article on this and making the data available for researchers so they can look up. Like, if you're interested in purgatorial apparitions, you can look them up, and here's a whole list of them from the dialogues. Well, one of them, and Gregory's also really good about telling us what his source was. He doesn't just say, I heard this somewhere. He'll say, this bishop told me this story about his priest by this name. And in one of those stories, that I forget what bishop Gregory named, told him about this, but one of the priests, one of the bishop's priests would do a very common thing back in the day. He'd go to the bathhouse regularly and bathe, because they didn't have bathtubs in private homes typically. Maybe if you were super wealthy or something. Instead, you had to go to a local bathhouse and to get a bath. And this was actually a kind of a big experience in the Roman world. They had not just baths, they had saunas, they had hot baths, they had cold baths, they had exercise rooms so you could get your workout. They had libraries there, so you could get a book and read it while you're in your bath. And they had bath attendants. So this priest is going to this one bathhouse regularly, and there's an attendant there who helps him. And he notices it's the same attendant. Whenever he goes there, there's this attendant. The attendant helps him out. He's really kind. He's really dutiful. He's really helpful. And the priest starts thinking, he's been so helpful to me, I ought to do something nice for him. So what the priest did was he got a couple of loaves of bread, and he took them to the bathhouse the next time he went. And then the guy helps him, and as the priest is getting ready to go, he said, hey, you've been so kind to me, I wanted to do something nice for you, please accept these loaves of bread. And it's at that point that the bath attendant says, well, I'd love to, but I can't. And it's not that he's not allowed to receive gifts, it's he can't accept them because he's not a living person. He's an apparition of a ghost being purified in purgatory. He says, I used to be the owner of the bathhouse, but for my sins, I've been assigned to come back and serve at the bathhouse as an attendant. Maybe he treated his attendants badly in life or something, so now he's got to be one of them. But he says, if you really want to help me, take the bread and use it to consecrate the Holy Eucharist and, have Mass said for me. And you'll know that if it works, you'll know it works when you come back and I'm not here anymore. So the priest took the loaves of bread, and they were leavened, because people, even in the West, used leavened bread at the time for the Eucharist. So he takes the loaves, he uses them to say Mass, he goes back to the bathhouse, and the attendant isn't there anymore. And he concludes that the attendant has gone to heaven, that his purification is over. Well, okay, so it was Mass that got him over the hump, that it was the final bit of his purification that let him get into heaven. But he was already being purified by working as a bath attendant, as an apparition. Now, Gregory thinks this is totally credible. Whether you do is a matter for you to determine, but it is common for purgatorial experiences to be reported like this in Christian history. And that would suggest that there are other ways God can purify someone besides just, putting them on a spit on the heavenly barbecue. So I don't see any problem with the way Father Castle understands this. There are more options. God is bigger than either single option, and I try not to limit God in what he might do. What I would suspect, if you ask me, is that both Father Castle and people who might see a purgatorial soul being purified by flame, because flame is a sign of purification, a symbol of purification in the Bible. Well, if in your imagination, if in your mind, you primarily associate purification in the afterlife with fire, well, then you might pick up, your subconscious might represent purgatory to you that way. On the other hand, if it's not the primary metaphor for you, your subconscious might represent purgatory and apparitions from purgatory in another way. I would suspect that both people would be picking up on aspects of things. And I would be inclined to say neither vision is likely to be fully complete and fully literal. I would suspect that the reality of afterlife purification or purgatory is more complex, not just than we do imagine, but that we can imagine. But I think different people pick up on different aspects of it depending on their background.
I can imagine that the owner of the bathhouse, he passes away and he thinks, all right, I'm ready for the next part. And he lands up back at the bathhouse like, oh man, what did I do wrong? So
back to square one, dude.
Yeah, exactly. F-Man, thanks for that question. Rude Dude 9451 asks, if two individuals had their brains swapped, would their soul remain in their original bodies? Or if it stayed, how would this mismatched soul/brain experience consciousness?
Okay, the answer to this question is undetermined. The church has no teaching on this, and there's not even, as far as I'm aware, any even common opinion on this. The idea of brain swaps is so new. It is talked about now in medical science, but it's so new that that I don't think any kind of consensus has emerged, even as a matter of opinion. So I can't give, and I don't have a firm opinion here myself, but I can talk about some of the options. So one of the things I would say is it, it, it we need to figure out the relationship between the soul and the brain in order to answer this question. To the extent that the soul, which is the life principle of the body that makes you alive, to the extent that the soul primarily operates through the brain, there could be a kind of soul swap. So your soul is what keeps your body alive, and that happens through the brain. You take someone's brain out, they're going to die. So you could argue the soul principally operates through the brain, even if it extends to other aspects of the body. So if you move the brain that is essential for life from one person to another, then you're essentially transferring not just the brain, but the soul along with it. So if you do the brain swap, they're each going to have the soul of the other. A is going to have B's soul, and B is going to have A's soul. That's possible. It's also commonly understood. Oh, let me mention another possibility before I move on. It's also possible that the brain is not tied to the soul in any essential way. One proposal that has been made and that is actually growing in popularity in neuroscience circles is that the brain may not be the seat of consciousness. It may be a filter that is designed to shape how consciousness functions, but it's otherwise completely independent. And if that's the case, if consciousness is not tied to the brain in any essential way, it would be hypothetically possible you could swap the brains and the soul would remain with the original body. So that also would be possible. It would just be operating through a new brain now. Now, traditionally, the soul has been understood as an indivisible entity, and there are philosophical arguments for that, but they aren't mandated as matters of doctrine. So could it be that the soul might have parts, and part of the soul might remain with the original body, even if the core of the soul transfers to the new body? Well, there's an interesting piece of evidence for that, which is there are situations with organ transplants, not the brain, but other organs, where some really strange stuff happens, that the person who is the organ recipient seems to get information from the organ donor, even if they don't know the organ donor. I'll give you an example. This was an instance where you had a guy whose lungs were shot, and he needed a heart-lung transplant. They found a donor, but that guy, the donor himself, needed a transplant but was able to donate his heart. So you have the heart of donor A going into a second person, but neither one of them has to die, because that guy then gets another new heart. And the medical situation is complex. This is not a usual one, but this kind of transplant, double transplant, does happen. So you've got these two guys, they're alive. Guy B has guy A's heart. And guy B not only starts to have food preferences that guy A had, he also starts calling his own wife's name by the name of guy A's wife.
Wow.
So let's say guy A, his wife is named Lois, and guy B's wife is named Lana. Well, guy B starts calling Lana Lois, and he didn't know guy A. So it's like there's something transferring more than just a heart here. Now, could that be a piece of the soul? Well, maybe, if the soul's individual, is not indivisible. I don't want to propose that. That gets us, as anything other than, well, hypothetically. I think there are other explanations, like maybe some kind of residue other than your soul gets transferred along with the heart in that case. So I just mentioned those as hypothetical possibilities. I'm not endorsing them. There's also an interesting possibility that I've never heard anybody propose. In fact, I've never heard anybody propose most of these. But it could be because souls don't have physical form. Aquinas would say they don't literally have a physical location. And so you can only metaphorically conceive of a spirit being present where it's active. Okay, if we go with that, then could your soul be active in more than one body? Could it be that your soul is running through the brain and the rest of the body you used to have? In that case, you could have the person's soul both operating through the brain in their new body and operating through everything but the brain in their old body, in which case you'd have a kind of cross-soul pattern with if you do a brain swap, where you've got parts of two souls swapped, but the rest of their souls continuing to animate the rest of their bodies. So that's another possibility. What the answer is here, I don't claim to know. I'm just trying to sketch out the conceptual space of what are some of the possibilities.
Well, it goes to show you as well that something that was once just science fiction, now it's becoming reality. It's creating new dilemmas for us humans. That's fascinating. So,
yeah.
All right. Well,
Fortunately, we're not there yet, but we need to be thinking about places that mad scientists might soon take us.
Yeah, you don't say. All right. Well, with that, we'll go to our final break, and we'll finish it off with these weird questions with Jimmy Akin.
There's only one Catholic Answers Live.
The Catechism defines evangelization as the proclamation of Christ and His gospel by word and the testimony of life. But what does that look like in real life? It looks like St. Paul street evangelists out in the public square sharing the good news. We're a Catholic nonprofit that starts conversations by handing out free sacramentals. Then we employ our method of listen, befriend, proclaim, and invite. Catholic Answers is supported in part by St. Paul Street Evangelization. Visit streetevangelization.com to learn more. Alexian Brothers is a proud sponsor of Catholic Answers Live. For 800 years, these Catholic brothers have offered a prophetic and daring response to the gospel, serving Christ in the sick, the poor, and the dying. Is God calling you to be a courageous disciple? If you feel called to total self-giving as a religious brother in the mission of Jesus, call our vocations office at 847-264-8703. That's 847-264-8703. AlexianBrothers.org.
The most original and exclusive Catholic content is on EWTN Radio.
I'm continually amazed and humbled at the way God can work through me to help so many people. Although I have no idea what the callers' questions will be that day, I trust that the Holy Spirit can use my education and experience to guide, challenge, or comfort those who call.
Mast Appeal with Colleen Kelly Mast. Saturday morning, 9 Eastern on EWTN Radio.
Welcome back, Catholic Answers Live. We're going down through the list of weird questions on this Friday afternoon or evening or Saturday morning, wherever you are on the planet, or if you're listening to it on podcast, because you could also do that some other day. So let's continue on with more weird questions. We go over to Caleb Henderson 3817, who asks, my wife is utterly convinced that all lizards, including and especially the dinosaurs, used to be dragons, and wings were the limbs mentioned in Genesis when God punished the serpent. Note that most modern-day lizards, although they do have legs, still scurry around on their bellies because of their wide stance.
Okay, so I'm not going to say that there's no possibility that your wife's proposal is correct, because anything that's logically possible, God could make happen. But I do try to evaluate proposals in light of the evidence we have for them. And in this, and I tend to look at things from the perspectives of faith and reason, and I tend, with scriptural questions like this, to look at it from the perspective of faith first. Now, one thing I'll note is that the church, and this is indicated in the Catechism, it's also indicated in other places like Pope Pius XII's 1950 encyclical Humanae Generis, and I've talked about this in the Jimmy Akin podcast in recent episodes. The church has already discerned that that the first 11 chapters of Genesis contain a good bit of symbolic information. And the serpent has been commonly understood in recent magisterial texts as a symbol of the devil, but not as a literal snake. And that would put us on guard against trying to get scientific information about dragons and dinosaurs and lizards out of this text. Having said that, if we set that aside, I would say that the proposal actually goes beyond what's in the text. Even if you take the text fully literally, it is involving elements that are not mentioned, like the wings. You say your wife believes that the limbs that the serpent would have lost would have been wings. And wings are not mentioned in the relevant texts. They're not mentioned in Genesis. God doesn't describe the serpent as having wings there. And God doesn't, in the other passage where the serpent shows up in a similar form as a dragon, is in Revelation. And wings are not mentioned in Revelation either. God doesn't describe that dragon as having wings. He describes it as having heads and horns and a tail, but there's no mention of it having wings. So that would be adding onto the text. And that would be another reason I would be cautious about this proposal, is we don't even have the concept of wings mentioned here. Also, given that wings are not even mentioned, and also creatures that have wings tend to have physical legs as well, like, birds. they don't just have wings, they've got legs too. And so I would expect that the serpent in Genesis, if we were taking this text fully literally, well, it would have legs. And if God were talking about removing its wings, well, then it would still have the legs. So I think legs are definitely involved here. And the original meaning of when Genesis says, "On your belly you shall go," would most naturally be understood as a loss of legs. Because if it doesn't lose its legs, it wouldn't have to go on its belly. And the fact that snakes don't have legs is one of the most notable things about them. They're unlike other animals. That's the main thing that makes them different from other animals, is they ain't got any legs. So I think that that's the obvious meaning of "on your belly you shall go," is you're not going to have legs. If it wasn't the loss of legs, well, then snakes ought to still have them. They ought to be lizards. So I think that from a faith perspective, looking at this as a religious text, as a person who shares the faith, I would say this proposal is not well supported by the exegetical and theological evidence. What about scientific evidence? Is there anything here from the perspective of science? Well, yeah, dinosaurs did not have legs like lizards. Actually, properly, so lizards have what are called sprawling legs that stick out from the sides of their bodies, and they can kind of like scurry along on their belly. And crocodiles similarly have sprawling legs, but lizards and crocodiles are not dinosaurs. What dinosaurs are is a kind of creature that has a special kind of hip that causes the legs not to spread out from the body, but to be underneath the body. It's called the parasagittal posture. But all dinosaurs, properly speaking, have a parasagittal posture. Like if you look at a T-Rex or a Triceratops or a Brontosaurus, all of them, none of them have legs that stick out from their bodies. All of them have an upright posture with the legs under their bodies. And so do their descendants, birds. If you think about the legs birds have, they're also under their bodies. And that's why birds actually are a kind of dinosaur. So the idea that that the dinosaurs, that all lizards, including and especially the dinosaurs, used to be dragons with wings, it not only would be hard to square with the biblical data, it also would be hard to square with the scientific data, because dinosaurs are a completely different kind of animal than lizards. And we have no evidence from the fossil record that lizards used to have wings. Some dinosaurs did, but in any event, I guess that's what I'd have to say, broadly speaking, about the proposal. I want to compliment your wife for thinking about it and trying to come up with explanations. That's always a good thing, trying to think through things. But it would be hard for me to support this idea either on biblical grounds or on scientific grounds. In fact, Edgar, modern birds are descended from theropods, which are the family of dinosaurs that T-Rexes belong to. So they're not descended from T-Rexes. They all died after the comet or meteor asteroid that struck the Earth 66 million years ago. But they're from the same family of dinosaurs. So if you ever are, like go to KFC and get a bucket of chicken, you can honestly say you're eating dinosaur tonight. And you know what? Dinosaur tastes like chicken.
A bucket of T-Rex, huh? That's what we're doing tonight.
Yeah.
There you go. Perfect.
Bucket of theropod at least.
Theropod. There you go. All right. Well, thanks for your question, Caleb, and also thank your wife for us, because that was a great thought experiment that she allowed us to go through. Jimmy, that was a very quick 2 hours. Thank you for joining me.
No, it's my pleasure.
All right. Well, that'll do it for us here. It's hopefully you all got a enjoyable and also great new understanding and appreciation for a lot of things in this life, especially for chicken. I certainly hope so. Well, that'll do it for us. We will see you next time. Sai will be back in this host chair next week, starting on Tuesday. So we will see you here next week. Have a great weekend. We will see you all next time, right here, God willing, on Catholic Answers Live.